It has been a long road and full of challenges. Being bilingual on graduation day has been one of my greatest achievements because I now have the tool set to go on reaching all the objectives I might set for myself in the future. A world of opportunities opened up to me when I started studying with Richmond Solution. I was really able to learn autonomously. I could study at home, in the library, or in the classroom. I could dive into the book, or by being connected to the internet, I could explore fascinating activities that empowered my English skills. I was able to instantly access the answers as they were only a click away. I loved working in a team. My friends and I had great fun as we learned. I learned a lot from them, and I know that they learned something from me. The exams were always challenging, but thanks to the practice that was constantly available on the digital platforms, we were fully up to speed to meet these challenges. I am really going to miss my school.
Richmond Solution helped us hugely to transform the English program in our school. We have now got the best tools to guarantee the best learning. Let me show you. Part of the process gives us access to a coach who builds our confidence, as well as training courses to better our abilities and to continue our improvement. Yes, good teachers are always keen to learn more. As we live in the cloud, as we say in this connected world, we have digital resources to improve our classes and which allow our students to learn from anywhere in the world, even quite literally in the clouds if they are on board an airplane. Through the Richmond Test Manager and Learning Analytics, we have a variety of possibilities to test, validate, and monitor students' progress. It is amazing to be able to see how your students are learning and to have the evidence of their learning at your fingertips. This really does make us very happy indeed. Richmond Solution is a solution designed for you.
Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to this Richmond webinar. My name is Valeria Casanova and I am the academic consultant for Richmond. It is the second day of our Richmond week and I would like to know, where are you joining us from? While you guys are writing in the chat, I'm going to give you a few reminders. So first of all, remember to register in our Richmond Week website, richmondweek.com. Here you will find a variety of resources that can help you out in your teaching practice, such as articles, videos, and my ultimate favorite, the bilingual edition of our Ruta Maestra, which I have already seen and it's absolutely amazing, so you have to take a look at it. And of course, don't forget to use our hashtags, hashtag joy of teaching and also hashtag Richmond Week. So I also have more news today, and which is, as well, I think really, really good news. And it's from UNIR, Universidad Internacional de La Rioja, and they are offering some very interesting scholarships. They are online master's degrees that can be validated by the Colombian Ministry of Education and will help you out a lot in your teaching practice. So before we start, I would like to see, where are you joining us from? Okay, so I'm looking in the chat. So we have from Santander, San Jerónimo Bajo Verapaz, Barranquilla, Colombia. From Colombia, Nuestra Señora de Rosario School. Okay, from Armenia, Quindío. That's nice. From La Vega, Cundinamarca, Honduras, Argentina, Guatemala. Wow, this is very nice. Okay, guys. So before we start, first, today we have two special guests. The first guest we have is Jimena Lizalde, who is our regional project manager. And also at 5 p.m., we have Gad Lim. And we're going to start off with Jimena Lizalde. And this is a huge honor for me because I am a very big fan. I've actually been to several of her webinars and they're really good. And I don't want to spoil this webinar, but I actually saw the presentation and you guys are in for a huge surprise. So first, Jimena Lizalde is a regional project manager for young adults and adults at Richmond. In her webinar, she's going to talk about digital competences for innovation in education, and she will review the importance of technology in teaching and particularly in English teaching. She will discuss the digital competences teachers need to develop in order to improve their teaching practices and, more importantly, to become innovators in education. So let's welcome Jimena. Hello, Jimena.
Hello, Vale. How are you?
Good. Thank you for asking. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very much for having me and for letting me be part of this amazing week of learning and sharing and joining teachers. So thank you.
No. Thank you. That's the idea. The idea is to help teachers, help them with their teaching practices, professional development. And I know that what you have in store for us is going to be very, very, very helpful.
Thank you. So, I wonder if you can see my screen now.
Now we can.
Okay. So again, thank you very much for having me, teachers all over Colombia and the world. Thank you very much for joining us in this second day of the Richmond week. As Vale just said, we're going to be discussing teacher digital competences for innovation in education, but I'd like to start by saying that the past few months have taught us many lessons. Nature forced us overnight and without a warning to quickly adapt to a situation that not only caught us all by surprise, but also challenged us to question some of our teaching beliefs. The idea or concept of the classroom, the processes of teaching and learning, our role as teachers, our students' role, parents' role, all our beliefs we had to revise in order to respond to new demands and needs. All of a sudden, technology became the answer that has allowed us to give education continuity under a new light and in a completely different scenario. I must acknowledge, teachers have been able to adapt, and in the process, we've definitely learned a lot. Our eyes were open to a wide range of digital tools and contents we were not taking advantage of. We are for sure more aware now of how much technology can enhance our teaching and enrich our students' learning. But for us teachers, there's still a lot to learn. What I want to do today is propose a reflection about the skills and competences teachers need to develop, not only to respond to the current demands and needs of the situation we're in, but moving forward. Because I strongly believe that what's happened this year will have a definite impact in the future of education. I don't think we will go back to what we understood as normal. There will be a new normal in education, and technology will be at the center of it. So as teachers, we have to be well prepared professionally to contribute to innovation in education. One of the most important lessons we've learned, I think, is that technology can, for sure, make instruction, teaching, and evaluation more varied and fun, and in many ways, more feasible. And that it allows us to provide our students with feedback in a variety of formats and in a more personalized way. I think we've also learned that even when technology can take care of many things for us, like grading homework, for example, which is great, it will not replace the teacher. This is not a battle of technology versus the teacher. No, it is the teacher, not technology, who knows the educational programs, the content to be covered, the objectives of that program, and the goals to be achieved by learners. It is the teacher, not technology, who knows what students need to know. Of course, this comes from the knowledge of the program and the course objectives. It is the teacher, not technology, who knows what would be nice for students to know. Those little extras students could do based on their likes, their interests, their abilities. And in the end, it is the teacher, not technology, who knows the students, their interests, their strengths, their weaknesses, and their learning needs. It is true that technology collects information and data that allows us to know our students. But without the teacher to interpret the information and make decisions based on it, the information has no value in itself. So again, the teacher is at the center of everything still. In the end, technology is only a tool that facilitates teaching and learning and expands the possibilities for assessment and feedback. Now, at this point, I'd like to make a distinction between two concepts, the concept of digital literacy and the concept of digital competence. Digital literacy refers to an individual's ability to find, evaluate, and compose clear information through writing or other media on a variety of digital platforms. It's our ability to discern and pick out valid, true, and relevant information from the vast collection of sources currently available in digital platforms. Our digital competence, on the other hand, is our ability as teachers to enrich and strengthen the teaching and learning process by using technology in a variety of forms, for a variety of purposes, and at different stages of the teaching and learning process. But more than that, our digital competence reflects our awareness of the constraints or drawbacks of contemporary digital and pedagogical practices, being driven by the impulse to innovate education even further. And let me say that again, to innovate education even further. Now, let me ask you a question. Do we, teachers, see ourselves as innovators? You might want to write a quick yes or no in the chat box, and Vale might be able to read how many yeses and how many no's we're getting. Or maybe, let me take a step back and ask you, what does innovation in education mean to you? Maybe you can drop me some of your ideas in the chat box. Vale is there to read you. What does education in innovation mean to you? And do you see yourself as an innovator? Let me hear it from Vale.
Well, in my opinion, I'm also a teacher. Do I see myself as an innovator? Yes, I would say yes, because I really like technology, and I really like to innovate in my classes, let's say, or maybe in my workshops when I'm training teachers, I really like to show them something new. So what does innovation in education mean to me? Well, I definitely would say change, like you said in the beginning, the new normal, let's say. And we have a few answers here in the chat. And a lot of people are saying, yes, they do see themselves as innovators. But of course, Ana Cristina says, yes, we are innovators. I also like this answer from Ivan Pereira. He says, innovation means everything.
Very, very nice. Thank you. Well, whether you do or don't see yourself as innovators, I'm going to show you that you are, actually. As a teacher that is digitally competent, we are expected to be innovators. So what's innovation? Let me just share with you a few definitions, and you'll see that almost every time we can see ourselves there as teachers. Innovation is a new method or idea, or the use of new ideas and methods. This is considered innovation. We can see ourselves doing that, right? Using new ideas, implementing new teaching methods, can't we? I'm sure we can all see ourselves right there. Innovation is also the process of translating an idea or invention into something that creates value for someone else. This is also considered innovation, and I think we can also see ourselves doing that, right? Transforming an idea into something relevant and valuable for our students. The development of new products, designs, or ideas is considered innovation too. I think you will agree that we can all see ourselves creating something for our students, like a worksheet or a game or a presentation, right? So I think that we can then all agree that teachers are definitely natural innovators. But what innovation in education requires us to do is to explore, research, and use all the tools we have available to uncover something new, including technology, digital tools. And this is something we didn't in the past do systematically and consistently. But now we have to, and we've been doing it. Now, let me come back to the definition of digital competence. It is the teacher's ability to enrich and strengthen the teaching and learning process by using technology. So my question now is, how digitally competent are we? Do you want to find out? Just like we have descriptors and performance standards for languages, there is also a framework of reference for the digital competences of educators. In order for it to be easily understood, it measures educators' digital competence in 6 levels, the same we use to determine levels of language proficiency, that is, A1 to C2. Each level of competence involves a variety of skills and activities that start with the awareness of the potential of digital technologies for enhancing the pedagogical practice at the A1 level, and ends with the teacher becoming a pioneer or an innovator that develops new pedagogical approaches by experimenting with highly complex digital technologies at the C2 level. So again, the question is, how digitally competent are we right now? How much more do we need to develop our actual and current digital competence? So, do you want to find out? What I'm going to do now is share with you the descriptions of the different levels of digital competence as proposed in the framework I just showed you. I want you to choose the one you identify with the most. And if you want, type the number of the description you select in the chat box, just for me to know that you've completed the activity and have made a choice. So again, we're going to go through the descriptions of digital competence levels for educators. And I want you to select the one you think that describes you best. So here we go. Number one, you are aware of the potential of digital technologies for enhancing pedagogical and professional practice, but you've had very little contact with digital technologies and use them mainly for lesson preparation, administration, or organizational communication. Description number two means that you are aware of the potential of digital technologies, but are also interested in exploring them to enhance pedagogical and professional practice. And it also means that you have started using digital technologies in some areas without following a comprehensive or consistent approach. You've just started using them in some areas. Description number three means that you experiment with digital technologies in a variety of contexts and for a range of purposes. And you integrate them into many of your practices. You use them creatively to enhance different aspects of your professional engagement. Let's see number four. Number four means that you use a range of digital technologies confidently, creatively, and critically to enhance your teaching. It also means that you purposefully select these technologies for particular teaching and learning situations, and you try to understand the benefits and drawbacks of different digital strategies. Let's see about number five. Number five means that you have a consistent and comprehensive approach to using digital technologies to enhance your teaching. You rely on a broad repertoire of digital strategies from which you choose the most appropriate for any given situation. And the last definition, number six, means that you question the adequacy of contemporary digital and pedagogical practices of which you are a leader. You are concerned about constraints and drawbacks of these practices and are driven by the impulse to innovate education even further. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to reread and select the number of the definition you identify yourself with. And maybe write it down in the chat box so Vale and I can know where you feel you are when it comes to your level of digital competence right now. Vale.
Well,
what about you?
Well, Jimena, I think I'm a 5.
Okay. Well, that's pretty cool.
I'm a 5, and in the previous slide, I was saying a B2 plus.
Okay, we're gonna verify that in a second as well. We're going to validate whether that is B2 plus actually. I see some. There might be some teachers telling us where they think they are.
They are. Well, actually, I see that Wilson is a 1. Maria, number 2. She says number 2. Diana Marcela, and A2, I think.
We're going to find out.
Yes. Sadie says, I consider the number 3. And well, a lot of people are participating. Actually, we have Luzmita, a 4. Juan Carlos said that he thinks he could be a number 3. Anto, a number 4. Tanya said definitely. She's 100% sure. A number 2. Susie also said number 2. And well, we have 2s and 3s, the majority.
Okay. Lots of 2s and 3s. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm actually going to tell you what it means, and you will learn exactly where you stand. We're still getting answers, right?
Yeah, we are. Now we are 3s and 4s.
Okay, some 3s and some 4s. Okay.
Yes, 3s and 4s.
Okay, so are you ready to find out where you stand? Please feel free to keep typing, but as you do it, I'm going to tell you what all these means. If you chose number 1, if description number 1 suits you best, you are at an A1 level of digital competence and are considered a newcomer to technology in education. This means that you need guidance and encouragement to expand your repertoire and to apply your existing digital competence into the pedagogical realm. So don't be afraid to do it, because you might know, if you're there, lots of things, but you still need to start applying them. If you find that description number 2 suits you best, you are at an A2 level of digital competence and are considered a digital explorer. This means that you have started using digital technologies in some areas, but without following a comprehensive or consistent approach. You need encouragement, insight, and inspiration, which can come from the example and guidance of colleagues in a collaborative exchange of practices. Don't be afraid to ask other teachers what they're doing, what tools they're using, for what purposes they've used them, and how they've worked for them. Because this might give you lots of ideas to start using certain tools more consistently and more systematically. If you chose description number 3, you are at a B1 level of digital competence and are considered an integrator, someone who uses digital technologies creatively in a variety of contexts and for a range of purposes. But you still need more time to experiment and to reflect. So there's still a little bit more you can do when it comes to developing your digital competence. If you identify yourself with description number 4, congratulations. You are an expert with a B2 level of digital competence. You can I'm having trouble with that word, purposefully select digital technologies for particular teaching and learning situations. And that means you've come a very long way, because now you're able to identify what tool and what strategy works best in specific teaching and learning situations. It also means that you're curious and open to new ideas, but you know that there are many things you haven't tried out yet. If you think number 5 describes you best, well, what can I say? You're a leader with a C1 level of digital competence. You have mastered the art of choosing the most appropriate digital strategy for any given situation. But most importantly, you are a source of inspiration for other teachers to whom you pass on your expertise. And finally, at the highest level of digital competence in education, we find the pioneers or innovators who experiment with complex digital technologies and develop new pedagogical approaches of their own. So, where do you stand? Did your choice change? Did you have to change the number that you thought you identified with? It's all right. The question here is whether we have reached or not our maximal potential when it comes to digital competences and have fully developed our educator digital competences. We need to ask ourselves how close we are to becoming real innovators in education when it comes to using technology to enhance teaching and the learning process. Once we know where we stand, we'll know what steps we need to take in order to continue improving. And you can see these as a life learning process. We're not going to become innovators overnight. This is like with any process of professional development, something that we need to start one day and start working on throughout our teaching careers. And just like with every kind of learning, it might be a never-ending learning process. But at the beginning, I strongly believe that the new normal in education will continue to have technology at its heart. So we need to become proficient in a professional way when it comes to dealing with technology to enhance and strengthen the teaching and learning process. Now, this is really interesting because no matter where you look, the highest level of digital competence an educator is expected to achieve is innovation. If we look at the UNESCO's ICT competency framework for teachers, the one I'm projecting right now, an educator's development process starts with understanding and learning about ICT in education and ends, as you can see here, it moved a little bit, but right here at the top, at the bottom, ends with teachers being able to create their own pedagogical approaches using ICT, becoming innovators in education as part of their professional development. Just like with the European framework, UNESCO sees development of teacher digital competence as a process that starts with the exploration of technologies at the A1 level, followed by its integration in a variety of contexts and for a range of purposes at what we could say the B1 level, and ends with the teacher becoming an innovator, someone who uses his or her knowledge to design innovative learning environments using a wide variety of technologies. This is equivalent to the C2 level in the framework we saw before. And as you can see, always in the middle, we have collaboration and networking, working with other teachers. If you were able to see my video on the resources site of the Richmond Week, one of the tips I gave you to develop your digital competence is precisely that. Talk to other teachers, learn from other teachers, ask them what tools they've used, what has worked for them. Because again, not necessarily a tool that works for you as a teacher, not necessarily works well for students. But the more feedback you collect on how different tools work for students, the more information you'll have to make decisions on what tools to incorporate systematically and consistently into your teaching practice. So as you can see, these frameworks are very similar. They start with the basic knowledge, moving on to collaboration and networking to learn. And in the end, the teacher is always expected to become an innovator. It is exactly the same at the local level. This is just a summary of what happens with the UNESCO competency framework. It starts with exploration, moving on past integration and collaboration with other teachers. And the end goal is always for the teacher to become an innovator. And it is the same if we look at this at the local level. What I'm showing you now is the Pentágono de Competencias TIC from the Colombian Ministry of Education. You probably know this because this was published back in 2013 and highlights not only the competences teachers have to develop, which include the digital competence, but also the moments or stages or competence levels teachers have to achieve. And again, going from exploration, the moment in which teachers learn about the possibilities and options they have in education offered by digital technologies, and start introducing them in some teaching and learning processes, following by a moment, again, of integration, in which teachers know how to use digital technologies and integrate them in their lesson planning, in their program or curriculum design, and ending again with the innovation moment, in which teachers use digital technologies to create, to express ideas, to build new knowledge collectively, and to design new strategies to reshape their own practice. So again, no matter where we look, the highest level of digital competence an educator is expected to achieve is innovation. Right? Something that is true and that we've been able to validate throughout these past months of lockdown and remote education is that technology will not replace the teacher, but that we still need to learn a lot. And we need to start making our own decisions regarding technology and how we use it. Again, what works for me as a teacher might not necessarily work for students. And what works for me as a teacher might not necessarily work for you as a teacher. We need to think about our students' context. The reason why we're going to use a specific digital tool, and ask ourselves whether it serves the purpose or not. I don't know if you know Kahoot. Kahoot was born like 2 years ago, and it became very, very popular. And everyone started using Kahoot because it was really fun and loud and colorful. But I wonder if it actually suits teaching purposes. And that's the question I think we need to start making when we choose to use different digital tools. Do they suit and match a specific teaching or learning purpose? And if not, we might need to start experimenting with digital technologies and finding the ones that we are not only comfortable with, but that serve a purpose. And remember, it's not a matter of technology versus the teacher. Again, it is you who knows all these things. And most importantly, it is you who knows your students and what they need. An amazing thing about technology is the possibilities of personalizing learning that it's given us. Students can also trace their own learning paths, working independently and autonomously. So again, as I told you at the beginning, technology facilitates teaching and learning and expands the possibilities of us doing lots of things. This all brings me to my final reflection, because I'd like to hear from you a little bit more, and I'd like to have the time to do it, to hear from you. My final reflection is this. We're living, I think, personally, I believe we're living a historic moment in education. One that will set a before and after. It is time for us teachers to move past the awareness of the potential of technology in ELT and turn our interest and our creativity into action. It's not only about exploring and experimenting with new digital tools, but rather about making use of them consistently, critically, and in a selective way. Again, not everything suits an academic purpose. We must be able to develop from the ELT perspective, because again, what works in math or in science not necessarily works for us in ELT. We need to find the digital technologies that work for teaching languages. We need to be able to develop a comprehensive approach for using digital technologies, and maybe even develop our own ELT strategies to enhance our teaching. All this implies developing innovation in education as an honest response to the context and the challenges we're currently facing. Then and only then will we become true innovators in education. I do want to hear from you now. I want to thank you for having joined me. I hope you find it useful. But now I want to hear a little bit from you, what you've been doing, the challenges you've been facing, and maybe Vale can help me read you in the chat box, and also any thoughts you want to share with all of us. This is the time to do it.
Well, Jimena, first of all, I just want to say thank you. I actually took a lot of notes, but I feel so inspired to continue learning. And you said a lot of things that I don't know, that really impacted me in a certain way as a teacher. But I do want to hear, before we move on to the question, I do want to hear people's comments and reflection. But either way, I'm going to state mine while people are writing. I took notes.
Good student.
Yes, that's me. I have the first one, which was really impacting. The first thing that you said, that technology is not going to replace the teacher, but actually that every time we watch those movies or those sci-fi movies, we see that there's a robot. So that's why when you said that, I was like, oh, she's right. That's not going to happen. But I always thought that was going to happen. But no, you're really right with everything that you said. And another thing that was really impacted me was that we need to talk to teachers. We need to work together. We need to be good colleagues. Sometimes we're not. But I actually thought that was very important, because I do learn a lot from my colleagues, because they're a lot more tech savvy than I am. So I'm very, very grateful. And we do have some comments in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the first comment is from Betty. She said, it's not enough to manage technology, but we also have to be digitally competent.
Exactly. That's the key message, I think, here. No, it's not enough to know that things are there. It's not enough to use a digital tool every now and then. We need to, I'm going to say it in Spanish, apropiarnos de esto, and start using it in our advantage for our purposes and our teaching objectives. And that's what I meant in my final reflection when I said we must turn our interest and creativity into action. Because I know we're all interested in learning more about technology in education. We're all interested in trying out new tools, but interest is not enough. We need to turn that interest and our natural teacher creativity into action. Start bringing those digital technologies to our actual teaching practice.
Yeah, well, actually, somebody just mentioned something like that. Betty actually said, be digital is an innovative way to say changing our minds.
Yeah,
so it's
very,
like
very nice.
Our mindset. And it's true. It's very, very true. And Elsa also has a very good comment. She says, I totally agree. Technology must suit our students' needs more than our desire of knowing how to use technology. That must not be the purpose.
That is another thing. It's included in my 5 tips if you want to watch the video later. One thing is talking to teachers, right? Collaborating and networking to find out what tools they've used, for what purposes, how they've worked for them, etc. But it is also important to listen to your students, because again, A tool that works for you as a teacher to plan, to present a lesson, might not necessarily work for students when they want to practice. So it's also important to hear from students what tools work for them, what tools are relevant for them, because it's two separate processes. Teaching is one thing, and learning and practicing and consolidating is another thing. So not only listen to your peers and colleagues, but also every now and then, listen to your students, how they managed to work with a certain or specific tool that you implemented. Did it help? Did it work? Did it serve its purpose? Because just like the teacher, Elsa, I think wrote, it's not what works for us. We might feel very comfortable using a very specific tool, but what if it doesn't work for our learners? So it's talking to both colleagues and students. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And well, now we have a lot of questions, if that's okay. Well, we have the first question. This is from Ruben. He says, sometimes students don't have access to those technologies. So how can we get closer in the classes with them?
Absolutely. Access to the technology is probably one of the biggest challenges we're facing at the moment. No, because not all students have equal access to technologies. So that is, I think, that is one of the first things we need to be aware of. What technology do our students have access to? Because it will determine the tools that you will be able to use. 2 blocks from where I am now, there's a little rural school, una escuelita rural, right there, 2 blocks from here. The only tool students have access to is their parents' mobile phone. Once teachers understood that, everything is happening via WhatsApp. Worksheets come and go, pictures of students, evidence of what they've done come and go via WhatsApp. So clearly, the most and first important thing to learn is what the conditions of access to technology are. What are those conditions? What access do students have? Because that will determine the tools that you will be able to use. So thank you. Thank you for asking me that question, because yes, access to devices, to the internet is probably one of the biggest challenges we face. But I've seen amazing teachers, like the ones in La Escuelita Rural, doing everything via WhatsApp. And they do it. It shouldn't be the limit, right?
I'm curious, Jimena, and do they have live classes?
Do they have, no, everything happens through little voice notes.
Oh, wow.
Voice notes come and go.
And they make it work.
And they make it work. No saben. I've been amazed. And the fact that it is 2 blocks from where I am has allowed me to actually see how it happens, because I couldn't believe that teachers were teaching social studies via WhatsApp. It's a primary school. It's little kids. No. It's amazing what teachers are doing. Entonces, kids, they build their little map at home with their parents, and they send their teacher the picture of their Colombia map with flowers. No. Unbelievable. But you see, those teachers understood that the only tool they had was parents' mobile phones, and they're making the best out of it. It's been an amazing experience for me.
Yeah, actually, that you've mentioned that, I've had that in one of my schools. And actually, in preschool, the teachers are recording some amazing videos, and they're sending them through WhatsApp. And through the videos, they're teaching English, and students. I don't know. I think, in my opinion, students are learning better or more like this.
Yeah, we can't let technology be the limit. Again, we are natural innovators. We're naturally creative teachers. No es por echarnos flores, but we are, right? So let's put that creativity into action. Mm-hmm.
Okay. We have one last question. This is from Jamile. She says, we need to appropriate the digital tools, but it is necessary for a teacher's training investment because currently the requirement is that teachers won't use technology, but what about teaching teachers to use and implement digital tools?
Yeah, it's something that I was thinking. Thank you very much, teacher, for the question. The first thing is that we need to understand that this is part of our professional development. Becoming a leader or a pioneer in using technology won't happen overnight. It's like every learning process. This is something that we need to take on. We need to get on board the ship of professional development and start doing things little by little. Remember, if we go back to my presentation, maybe Lucia can help me bring the screen back. I don't know if you remember the framework. It's like a map, a road that we need to walk. And there's a starting point and an end point. And like in every process, it will take time. And this is an investment we need to do. There it is. Thank you. It's an investment that we need to do ourselves. Today, there are many MOOCs, video tutorials, webinars being offered by experts in technology and education that can help us learn a lot about a variety of tools that are out there, and that is it's something that we need to start doing. Again, we will not become innovators C2 proficiency level in digital competence overnight. Like every professional development process, it will take time. That's why it is important that we identify where we stand so that we can start taking steps towards becoming more proficient in what we know and how we use technologies in education. But it is a process. We're not expecting anyone to become an innovator by tomorrow. No.
I wish.
Yeah. I wish there were a magic pill. Yo ya me lo hubiera tomado, right? No. It's a process. It's a learning process, and we need to start.
Okay, Jimena. Well, actually, I just have a lot of thank yous. Really, just thank you for sharing your background knowledge. It helps us to keep on teaching. Just a lot of Daniel said, sorry, that he's very, very grateful. Many thanks for every advice, every methodology you shared with us, so we can improve our teaching practice. There are a lot of thank yous. Jerry said, excellent performance. Thank you, Jimena and Richmond. Really, really, Jimena, I think all we have to say is just thank you.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much again for having me. Thank you very much, teachers, for joining me. I'm just going to leave for a few more seconds my information here, so you can contact me if you want more information, if you want me to share with you the documents of each framework. Do feel free to contact us. We're here to help. And thank you, Vales, for being with me throughout the session as well. Muchas gracias.
No, thank you. It's kind of weird being the other way around.
For once.
For once. No, really. Thank you. I'm truly inspired after this presentation, Ricky. I really am.
Thank you.
Okay. So thank you so much, Jimena, again. This was really interesting. And also, I would like to remind everyone that in a few minutes, we're going to connect with Gad Lim, who leads the team responsible for designing and developing Michigan tests. And we're going to talk about designing learning-oriented assessments. Don't forget to use the hashtag Richmond Week and also hashtag Joy of Teaching. So we're going to take a short break, go to the bathroom, have a drink of water, but do not take a nap and come back. And thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome again. Welcome again to our Richmond week. This is our second day of our second webinar, and my name is Valeria Casanova, and I am the academic consultant for Richmond. In our previous webinar, we had people from all over. We had people from Honduras, Ecuador, Colombia, Chile, and it was very, very nice to see everybody. In our previous webinar when we talked to Jimena, and she talked about digital competences for innovation in education. So before we start, I would like to remind you to register to our website, richmondweek.com, where you will find a variety of resources that can help you out in your teaching practice, such as articles, videos, and my ultimate favorite, the bilingual education of our Ruta Maestra. And of course, don't forget to use our hashtags, hashtag Joy of Teaching and Richmond Week. So I'm so excited to introduce our guest speaker, Gad Lim, who is going to talk about a very interesting topic today. So Gad Lim leads the team responsible for designing and developing Michigan tests, as well as research and validation activities for them. He has a vast experience in standardized testing and exam research, and he has taught in higher education and trained language teachers in Asia, Australia, Europe, and the Americas. So in his webinar, Designing Learning-Oriented Assessments, he will explore the need to create assessments that include design features that match the intended purpose, that is the desire for assessment to inform learning. We will also ask ourselves about learning-oriented assessments and how to design them. So welcome, Gad.
Good evening. It's good to be with everyone.
No, it's good to have you here. Thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure.
Okay, perfect. So, Gad, today you're going to talk to us about designing learning-oriented assessments.
That is correct. Shall we get started?
Yes.
Okay. So today, again, welcome everyone to this session on designing learning-oriented assessments. And I'd like to begin this presentation by asking you this question. Do you think this watch you see on the screen is a good watch or not a good watch? And in fact, the only way you can actually answer that question is if you actually know the purpose of this watch. Now, if the purpose of a watch is for keeping time, and let's say this Lego watch we have on the screen can actually accurately tell time, then we can say that it's actually a good watch. On the other hand, nowadays, everyone has mobile phones with them that they can use to keep time. So hardly anyone actually uses watches for keeping time. And perhaps for some people, they wear watches in order to impress people. Now, if your purpose is to impress other people, then perhaps this Lego watch is not going to be very impressive. On the other hand, this watch over here, which last I checked costs over 200,000 US dollars, is probably going to be very impressive if that is your purpose. The point I'm trying to make here is unless you know the purpose of a thing, it is impossible to judge whether that thing is a good example of that thing or a not so good example of that thing. And I think we need to carry that sort of thinking as we think about assessments as well. So for example, let's think about classroom assessments and large-scale assessment. Now, some of us might have positive thoughts about one or the other and negative ideas about one or the other. But I'd like to argue that we cannot make that judgment until we know the purpose for each one of them. So let's think about this. For example, I have here something that says an assessment needs to include many items. Do you think this is more true for classroom assessment or for large-scale assessment? Think about it and answer this in your head. Assessment needs to include many items. Is this more true for classroom assessment or for large-scale assessment? Now, I trust that the answer you came up with for this question is that this is actually more true for large-scale assessment. And the reason this is the case is that quite often large-scale standardized assessments are used for making high-stakes decisions. And if we're making high-stakes decision, we don't want it to just be one item because, whether you get in to a school or not, or whatever that high-stakes decision is, will then rise and fall on your getting that one item correct. If you have many items in it, then the test is more likely to be reliable and give a consistent score. And therefore, a large-scale assessment is more likely to include many items because of the particular purpose to which we're using this. On the other hand, you can imagine that in classroom assessment, if we have a lot of items, then you end up using all your class time in assessment and you don't have time for the business of teaching. And therefore, it actually is a bad assessment in that case. So you can see it's not actually whether you have many items or few items that makes something good or bad. In this case, it's being able to join up a particular design feature of assessments and the purpose of the assessment. So in this case, if it's classroom assessment, you probably don't want it to be too long. But if it's large-scale assessment, then it probably is a good idea. Let's think about the second item here. A nod can count as assessment evidence. In which context do you think would this be a good design feature? Now, I trust you know the answer to this. It's probably that in the classroom context, yeah, that's probably good enough. Sometimes, as a teacher, you just want to find out whether people have gotten a particular point you're making. And if they nod and it looks like the nod is not because they're falling asleep, then you say, well, I guess they actually know the answer and I can move on. On the other hand, for large-scale standardized exams, a nod being the assessment evidence is probably not a good idea. Now, in a previous life, I was responsible for a test that healthcare workers took in order to see whether they had good enough English in order to migrate to countries like Australia and the United Kingdom in order to practice nursing and medicine over there. Now, think about it. Let's say the authorities at the hospital in Australia want to know, is your English good enough to safely practice in this country? And then the nurse does not say anything at all and just nods. That's kind of scary if you design your test that way. Wouldn't you agree? For that kind of context, if you're going to be somebody who's going to receive medical care or health care from that professional, you probably want stronger evidence about their English language proficiency than just a nod. So again, you see, you have to know the purpose of an assessment in order to be able to judge whether the features it contains are good and appropriate for it. This is actually probably true as well for how we go about scoring them. Now, in here, I have a list of several different ways we might go about scoring assessments. We could provide just a score, like one number, all the way to something that provides very detailed evaluative comments, as well as getting feedback from our peers. And I think you'd agree with me that most of the time, large-scale assessments tend to be at the upper end of this particular table, and classroom assessments on the lower end of the table. Okay? If you imagine large-scale assessment, let's go back to that particular example of the nurses and the doctors. Do the authorities in the country they're arriving at want to read a 10-page report on their abilities? More likely, what they want is just to know, is this person good enough? And just give me a number that tells me whether they're good enough or not. On the other hand, in the classroom context, because we're continuing with our lessons, the detailed comments will be very useful in moving people on to the next thing, and peer feedback as well will help people to learn from one another. So again, you can see, not just in the design of the test, but also in how scores are reported, you have to know the purpose of an assessment in order to be able to say whether it is good or bad. Okay? This is one of the reasons why I don't actually like it when people talk about formative assessment versus summative assessment. In fact, this is, I think, not a very good dichotomy, which you will see the moment we ask this question coming up on the next slide. Here's the question. Can a summative test serve a formative purpose? Again, can a summative test serve a formative purpose? And I think you would agree with me that, in fact, a summative test can indeed serve a formative purpose. You can take the score that the test taker gets there and make general judgments around their level of English language ability and proficiency, and based on that, decide how you're going to go and teach them next. So you can see, if a summative test can be a formative test, then you can't say that a formative test and a summative test are polar opposites of one another. In fact, I suspect that quite often when we talk about formative assessment and summative assessment, people are really wanting to say that the people who do formative assessment are the good guys, and the people doing summative assessment are the bad guys. And I'd like to suggest that's not a good way of thinking. In fact, as you realize, with Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, they actually belong to the same family. At the end of the day, they're one family. And that is why, whether we are engaging in classroom assessment or in large-scale assessment, we should not be thinking in terms of one is good, the other is bad, but rather think about, how can my assessment practice help to ensure learning? And this is true equally for the teacher doing assessment in the classroom, as it is for someone like me, for example, who is engaged in large-scale standardized assessment. We need to keep asking ourselves, how does this contribute to these learners being able to further their learning? And this is what we want to think about as we go through the rest of our presentation today. And this is the first question I want to ask. Is classroom assessment always learning oriented? Okay, is classroom assessment always good? Now, many years ago, I'm ethnically a Chinese person, so that's me in the screen over there. And these are some of the classroom assessment practices I encountered as a young person. And please tell me whether you think these are examples of good assessment practice or not so good assessment practice. Okay? Now, one of the first things was that sometimes we were quite naughty little kids and our teachers were not very happy with us. So sometimes, because they were very upset at us, they would find obscure information to make the test really difficult for us so that, we would perhaps learn our lesson and pay attention more. Now, think about it. Is this good assessment practice or not so good assessment practice? I imagine you'll agree with me that this is not actually the point of assessment. Okay? If you make a test about obscure information, then you're actually testing things that are probably not very important, and therefore it doesn't serve a very good purpose. Here's another one. Nobody did the reading, so give a quiz. As you can tell, our teachers back in the day were often not happy with us. So again, because nobody did the readings, as a kind of punishment, giving us a quiz. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't think this is good assessment practice either. Now, in the Philippines, growing up, basketball was the big sport for us. So it was very, everyone was very much into it. So sometimes our teachers would give us extra points for going to the basketball game to support our team. Again, I don't think this is very good assessment practice because what we're trying to learn in class has absolutely nothing to do with basketball. And if we get extra points, that would make it seem like, oh, you got a high score, therefore you must be very good in math or in English or whatever it is. But in fact, the score tells you nothing about our skills in math or in English. It just tells you that we went to a basketball game. So again, classroom assessment practice that was not very good. How about creating a test that most people will pass? Well, if you create a test where every single person in the class will get it correct, then you will not know which things people don't know, and therefore it will not help you in determining what thing to teach next. Similarly, if you give a test where everyone gets a 0, you also do not know who knows a few things and who knows nothing at all. So a test where most people will fail is also not good assessment practice. So as you can see, just because classroom assessment is what we're talking about does not mean it's necessarily good practice. And in fact, there is one particular question I ask whenever I give presentations, which I think helps to make really clear whether your assessment practice is learning oriented or not. Okay? I'm going to show you this question and you can answer the question for yourself and you'll be able to diagnose whether your assessment practice is learning oriented or not. So here's the question. It's been a long day at school, and at the end of the day, you finished teaching your last class, and you're sitting there and thinking about the day that just passed. Which of the two statements below are you more likely to think of? Today, what I taught was ... or today, what my student learned was ... Again, after a day at school, which of the statements below are you more likely to think of? Today, what I taught was, or today, what my student learned was. Now, I'm sorry we can't interact with one another in a more natural setting here. But whenever I've presented it live, there's always a sudden quiet in the room because I think for many of us, we are more likely to think of the first rather than of the second. Now, if you're thinking of the first, you're not actually thinking in very learning-oriented terms. Rather, you're thinking, what have I delivered? And if I've delivered it, job done. I can just wash my hands of it. On the other hand, if you're thinking in terms of the second, then you're probably engaging in some other practice that will result in greater learning. And I'd like to suggest that it probably looks something like this. If you're doing learning-oriented assessment, what likely is happening is that you get your students to perform something, like do a language task, for example, and you observe the student doing the language task, and depending on how they perform, you make interpretations on what it is that they know or do not know. You keep a record of that particular observation and interpretation, and that record might just be in your head, or sometimes it might be in a class record, or on a piece of paper or on the computer. And then later on, you will use that to give feedback to that particular learner. And then from there, you move on to getting them to do a new performance, a new task that is more appropriate to their level. And as you go through this particular cycle, it creates a very positive feedback loop where they keep on learning. So my question is this what you are doing in your assessment practice? Are you thinking about ways that you can, after you've marked all the quizzes, do you just give the quizzes back to them? Or do you actually take a look at which things did they struggle with? Which things did this particular person do well on? And how much did you think of that as you planned your next lesson? So much for whether all classroom assessment is learning-oriented. Now I'd like to move on and think, can large-scale assessment be learning-oriented? Now let's get back to this particular learning cycle. Is it possible that in a large-scale assessment we have performances? Well, yes, in fact, as we said earlier, quite often these large-scale assessments are much longer. And are we able to make interpretations based on people's performance on these tests? And the answer is yes. Do we record these interpretations? Yep, we give them a score. And that's quite often the feedback. And depending on that, maybe they might go on and do something else. So I think the answer to the question, can a large-scale assessment be learning-oriented? The answer to that is yes. And I'd like to suggest that, in fact, in assessment, there is a vertical dimension and a horizontal dimension. And I'd like to suggest that in a large-scale assessment, after you finish taking it, it's not like the following week you're going to be taking it again. But you might take it after a period of time because you want to see whether you've made sufficient progress in order, for example, to move up a different CFR level. So it might be that at the beginning of a semester, you might take a large-scale test and see that, oh, I'm at B1. And at the end of the entire semester, then you might take it again and see, well, have I now progressed to B2? So you can see that a large-scale assessment serves the vertical dimension of assessment. On the other hand, classroom assessment, I'd like to suggest, serves the horizontal dimension of assessment. So for example, I would hope that in your language classroom, you do not have learners who are, some are A1 and some are C2, because the differences in ability are so great that, it would be impossible to teach it properly or well. I would hope that in your class, people are all roughly at the same level. So let's say all of them are at B1 level. But as a classroom teacher, you know that at the B1 level, well, this student over here finds this particular learning point more challenging. And this other student over here finds that particular learning point easy, but struggles with something else. And classroom assessment is the kind of assessment you can use on that level in order to see the particular strengths and weaknesses of your learners within the same level in order to better tailor your teaching and learning experience for them. So you can see that they actually have distinct roles and distinct purposes, which can actually be used together in order to support learning. Let me illustrate this in one other way. So in this particular in this particular slide, you will see that the teaching learning cycle I was trying to show earlier is shown in the middle here, where the teacher will engage the student in a cycle of performance, observations, interpretations, recording it, feedback, and so on. But how do they get there? It might be that at the very beginning, you might do a big placement test for them. So you find out which level they are, and you assign all people at the B2 level to the same class. And this CFR framework, for example, could be the basis of the high-level objectives for the class, as well as maybe the contents and themes that you include in there. And these become the basis of a learning-oriented syllabus that you can use in the classroom. So you have, on the one hand, a micro-level assessment, and then at some point, the external exam can come back in to tell you whether they have, in fact, learned so much that they've moved up one level. So you can see what you have is, in fact, one cycle here at the micro level and another cycle here at the macro level. In this fashion, classroom assessment and large-scale assessment can go hand in hand in order to serve the learning needs of our learners. Now, having argued that both classroom assessment and large-scale assessment can be learning-oriented, and having argued how the two of them can actually be joined together to serve learning, let's think about whether large-scale assessment can be even more learning-oriented. And let's go back to our learning cycle here. So let's think, for example, about performance or the tasks that they will engage in. Now, in this particular slide, I have here what's called the socio-cognitive framework for validating exams. And what it's telling us is that we first notice what the test taker characteristics are, and on the basis of that, we develop tasks that are contextually appropriate, meaning at the right level of difficulty, that they're appropriate to the kind of language that they need to use. And on the other hand, they also need to be cognitively valid. That is, that the tasks actually elicit the same cognitive and mental operations as the real-world language use situation. And with that in mind, let's think about how we can make these assessments more context valid and more cognitively valid. So here's an example of an assessment I work on for learners who are at middle school age, so about 11 to 15 years old. And one of the speaking tasks for them is one that looks like this. So they're shown two pictures and they have to spot the differences. Now, if you think about it, this is actually a task that's contextually very valid for them. When I was younger, I always look forward to the Sunday newspapers coming because the newspaper included a spot the differences thing. So that was something I found interesting and motivational. And so, I love being able to do that task. So coming up with an assessment task that is something like this will make it more contextually valid for younger learners at middle school age. In the same way, you can have a writing test task that's about writing a story based on a number of different pictures. Now you can see a task like this is the kind of task that you might actually use in the classroom, but in our test, we also use it in a large-scale context. So it's easier to join up the classroom assessment practice with a large-scale assessment practice. Let me show you something else. Here you will find that they're actually, on the face of them, pretty run-of-the-mill multiple choice questions that are really vocabulary and grammar questions. But we know one thing about learners younger learners at that particular age, which is that their brains are actually still developing, and therefore if every single item forces them to think of a new context, it actually is more challenging for them because they have to reorient themselves after every single question to the new context before they can adequately engage with the question. So in this particular case, what we did was we actually came up with, in this case, 8 items that are all on a common theme. So that once they start thinking of the gymnasium, where they do their physical education and so on, they can start going through each one of the questions without having to think about other contexts coming in. So you can see you can also design a test to be more cognitively valid for a particular age group. So if you know the purpose and the age group, the test taker characteristics, you can make them more contextually valid, as we saw with these tasks, and you can also make them more cognitively valid. Now let's move on. We've seen that the performances that we elicit from them can be more valid and can be more learning-oriented. Could we also make observations, interpretations, and records that are also more learning-oriented? Now, and this is the scoring validity aspect here. And let's go back to what we saw earlier. Earlier, we said that in large-scale assessment, quite often we just get a score, or maybe at most a few scores. But that doesn't have to be a given. In fact, this is what happens if you only give one score. So let's say you give one score from 1 to 5, each one corresponding, let's say, to a CFR level. If you just say that somebody is at 3, then all you know about that person is they're at B1 level. So if you wanted to provide them with feedback, you can only provide them with general feedback. So, well, what does a B1 person know? Well, this is what you can do. You don't have much else to tell them. On the other hand, here's an example from one of the tests I work on. In this case, for the writing test, we came up with a checklist scale with 18 different criteria that looks at different aspects of writing ability. So some of it will be about the ability to write narratives. Some of them might be around using punctuation and capitalization correctly. Some of them will be around the use of connectors, let's say. And if you actually make a lot of observations, you're able to see, for example, different patterns of strengths and weaknesses for different test takers. And so, for example, if you mark them on 18 different criteria, it then becomes possible to say that for learner 1, you are strong in areas 1, 3, 4, and 18, but you need further work in 2, 16, and 17. On the other hand, learner 2 could be at exactly the same CFR level, but they have mastered different things, so they can work on the other areas that they are weaker in. And this is the basis that we had for coming up with the results, the score report that we give to our test takers. We do not just give them a score for each of the 4 skills. We actually give them detailed feedback about their particular strengths and weaknesses, and we actually give them suggestions on things they can do next in order to further their learning. Now, on the face of it, these statements here might just look like the feedback that you see in other places, but in fact, every single test taker gets a different feedback based on their particular pattern of strengths and weaknesses. And let's think about, in that case, I was talking about writing. Let's think about listening and reading. In listening and reading, we also went and did something else. So we had, let's say, 50 items on the test, and we tried to identify the different sub-skills you need to have in order to be able to answer each item correctly. So for example, it might be that for item number 1, you need to have mastered sub-skills 1 and 2 in order to be able to answer it correctly. On the other hand, for item number 2, it is sub-skills 1, 3, and 4 that you need to have mastered in order to answer that item correctly. Okay? And there is actually now a sophisticated way of modeling called cognitive diagnostic modeling that allows us to validate the sub-skills that you need in order to answer items correctly. And then it tells you lots of interesting things. For example, how likely is it that a particular person has mastered each of the 5 sub-skills? So we'll be able to say that, learner number 1, Juan, you're on sub-skill 1, we are 90% confident that you've mastered it, but sub-skill 3, we're only 20% confident that you've mastered it. So maybe you want to work on sub-skill 3. Okay. In fact, from this study as well, we also learned the order in which different sub-skills are learned. We actually tag these things for 20-something different sub-skills, but here I've just combined them into 5 different sub-skills. And we actually learned, for example, that you actually need a base of vocabulary first before you're going to be able to go and work on inference questions in reading. And so I'm sorry we do not actually have enough time today for me to go into this in any detail. But if you want to find out more about this particular study, I've actually made 3 different videos looking in detail at the results of this particular study. And you can view these videos on our YouTube page, Michigan Language Assessment's YouTube page, and look for Michigan Test Talks, and the title is What is Behind Reading and Listening? Insights for Teachers. So in those 3 videos, I go into the details of these studies to show the order in which the different sub-skills are learned and which sub-skills depend on a prior sub-skill and which ones don't depend on another sub-skill. And I trust that you will find this useful. But these studies are actually the basis behind the feedback that we provide to our learners. And therefore, the feedback we give are also ones that are more learning oriented than usual because they're actually backed up by the evidence of lots of people who have taken these tests. So we know that the learning progressions that we have observed are actually quite accurate. And so, in conclusion, we want to design learning-oriented assessments, and we always need to think about the purpose of an assessment in order to be able to judge whether it is a good assessment or a not so good assessment. And if we want an assessment to be a good assessment, it's good for us to be thinking in terms of learning. How does this assessment help people with learning? And I'd like to offer this particular learning cycle, this learning wheel, to help us think, is my assessment practice helping people learn? In the classroom, am I setting them tasks for them to do that I observe and interpret and record, and then provide them with feedback and keep going? Or am I just delivering the lesson I wanted to deliver and move on to the next thing? And the same is true for large-scale assessment. Are we trying to elicit the best performances from people? Are we making the best interpretations for people? And are we giving them the most detailed feedback that we can in order to feed further learning for these people? At the end of the day, we need to be making sure that we take into account test-taker characteristics in making sure that our assessments are contextually valid, are cognitively valid, have scoring validity, and if we do that, they are more likely to have positive consequences and be able to line up quite well with other indicators of their ability. I hope you found this particular session interesting. Thank you for your for joining me in this, and I look forward to having a conversation with you and answering some of your questions in the remaining time that we have. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, really. Thank you so much. It was a nice reflection, especially on assessment. There were a few things, I took some notes too. There were a few things that stood out, and I have a confession.
Alrighty.
That I hope you don't get upset, but when you were mentioning the assessment practices, I think I was one of those teachers.
Well, as I said, I myself am guilty of it. And I think everyone, we teach a lot of classes and we have a lot of students. So it's easy for us to just think, what have I taught rather than what my learner has learned. But if we keep in our minds, what has my learner learned, I think we will do them a world of good.
Yeah, that's actually something that I wrote down and I highlighted it. I highlighted that and I actually highlighted the purpose of the assessment and how can my assessment ensure learning. So that was something very interesting, especially because sometimes we evaluate students, but we haven't really taught them what we're going to evaluate.
Yes.
I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
But it was very, very interesting. Thank you so much. We do have a few questions. Actually, Alex Cruz says, assessment is the most delicate and important aspect in the teaching learning process, but how can I get the idea of a quantitative grade out of my students' minds?
Oh, so it sounds like what Alex is asking is whether we can do away with a number.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the challenge with the number, right, is that many of us are in a particular teaching learning context where the school, for example, where a number is still necessary. But if you think about it, the number doesn't always have to come immediately or all the time, right? At the beginning, we said, can a nod count as an assessment? Can count as assessment evidence? So in the class, you ask everyone, did you get that? And everyone either raises their hand or nods. That's not a number, right? So it's actually possible to design assessment in a way where, it doesn't boil down to a number. In fact, especially in the classroom context, I would say, think of ways that you can just get them to perform things and they don't have to immediately see what the results are. Or for that matter, you could just give them feedback in a couple of sentences and refuse to give them a number at the beginning. You can also just make sure that you just give numbers at particular important junctures because that's still necessary for institutional purposes.
And I'm guessing here's where you're mixing formative and assessment in different families.
Right. But as I said, I don't think I want to think in terms of formative and summative. I would say that, all assessment can contribute to learning. But sometimes you contribute to learning by giving them detailed feedback, and sometimes you help them learn by giving them a number. Sometimes they do need that number too, right? And so I would say use a variety of assessments, because that's another good principle. If you use a variety of methods, then you know that this person is not just someone who is very good at answering multiple choice questions. This is a person who actually knows the content, right? If you use a variety of methods, then you have many different demonstrations of their ability to do it in different contexts.
Oh, okay. And we also have another question. And this is from Rosina, and she says, how can we know the kind of assessments our students from 11th grade need? 11th or 12th grade, I would say, the last year of high school.
Well, again, I would say, think about the purpose of the assessment, right? I'm sure that at 11th grade or 12th grade, it's not that you only ever do one assessment, right? There are assessments you do just to check whether, where they are at the beginning. There are assessments you do in the middle to see where your progress is. And there'll be assessments at the end to see what they have achieved. And so for each one of those, you have to devise the assessment that's most appropriate. And that, of course, in part depends on your syllabus, right? What are they trying to learn? And I showed in that big diagram earlier that you need to have some basis for your syllabus in order to know what sorts of assessment you do. So I would throw the question back to our colleague here on, what kind of assessment for people in 11th grade? Well, that will depend in part on what are you trying to get them to learn? And then what sorts of assessment tasks will help you know whether they have learned it or not.
Okay. So I'm guessing we have to mix it up a little bit, a little trial and error, I would say.
A little bit of trial and error, but also just making sure to think again of, what am I trying to achieve here, right? What am I wanting the learner to learn? And that's where you build your assessment.
Okay. And we do have another question, and it's from Edward, and he says, we in the whole Latin America, I guess, have a big problem. How could I give useful and continuous technological formative assessments to my students when my school doesn't have an internet connection?
Now, that's an interesting question. I guess the question says, how can I give useful and continuous technological formative assessment? And the only thing in that long phrase that's not possible because of the lack of an internet connection is the word technological. Now, let's say we get rid of the word technological there. How could you give useful and continuous formative assessments? Well, there are lots of tools that teachers have used for generations and generations, right? Giving people when I was growing up, it was when teachers gave us stars, right? So you do something right, I hand you out a star, and you post it on the board on your classroom, and this student has 10 stars now. This student has 5 stars. That's actually a kind of feedback that you're giving to them, right? They know, I've learned this much, right? So there are lots of tools that are available. If we nod back when our students nod to us, that is actually feedback we're giving to them as well. Okay, so every moment of the teaching day can actually be infused with assessment, I think, and we don't necessarily need to use technology for it. Now, I'll admit that technology can make life easier, right? If instead of just asking students to raise their hands, if we're able to use one of these polling sites online, then it will immediately tally up the number of people who answered A or B, and so it makes things slightly faster. But it doesn't mean that our old technology can't do the same thing. It's slightly less convenient, but we can still do it, right? We can ask people to come up with portfolios, and now there are online sites that help you collect portfolios more easily and make them prettier, because you can, just cut and paste beautiful pictures and so on. But it doesn't mean that without an online site, you can't come up with a portfolio as a form of assessment. So I would say, yes, it's too bad that their school doesn't have a good internet connection, but there are still all kinds of things that teachers have always been able to do in order to provide feedback to our learners.
Okay. And we also have a question, which is, what if we have students that don't manage the same level of English?
Okay, so I imagine the question is that the people in a class are of mixed ability.
Yes.
Well, if the people are of mixed ability, there are a number of things we can do to make sure that people are not, on the one hand, wasting their time, or on the other hand, struggling too much. So, for example, instead of giving an assessment that tells them, answer questions 1 to 5, everyone needs to answer all 5 questions. You can ask them to answer at least 3. And therefore, the weaker people can just do 3 and be successful and feel like they've accomplished something. But the ones who are stronger don't need to sit around. They can go on to do number 4 and number 5, and they can therefore have, be able to engage with the more challenging content in questions 4 and 5. So there are ways of making sure that our assessment can actually be good for people at different levels. Okay, and I'd have to say that even in the large-scale context, that is true. There are large-scale assessments that are primarily designed to test people at one level of ability, and there are ones that are more multi-level. So I would say that if you were to go out and select assessments, take a look at the design of the assessments to make sure that they're more appropriate for your classes, whether they're single level or multi-level tests for single level and multi-level classes.
Okay. I actually have a question about what you just mentioned. I know you're telling us that we don't really need a score, but just talking about the institution and everything, how would we evaluate students if we allow them to choose how many questions to answer?
So that's actually a good question. Now, of course, you have to think about whether the example I gave there of do at least 3 out of 5, whether that's what you want for the final to contribute towards the final score. I think for that particular example, I was using it for on a day-to-day basis while you're teaching them. That they do exercises, and the exercises tell you something about their ability, but not everything necessarily needs to contribute towards the final score, I would say. Of course, you can design your class in any way you want. It could just be that you have 2 large unit tests at the midpoint and at the end point, or you could assign a particular percentage for these things. One of the things I did when I was teaching was I actually allowed my students to decide for different activities how many percentage points they wanted each one to count for. So for example, in my teaching, some people needed to produce an essay, whereas other people, one big essay at the end, and there are people who like doing little quizzes. So people who would, some people don't like the one-time big-time exam, right? Because, oh, that's very scary. If I bomb this exam, then, I'm gone. So the people could choose to give that a smaller weighting and the something else a larger weighting. So that's what I did in my classroom in order to accommodate the fact that different learners have different preferences and they have different ways of cobbling together evidence of their abilities to contribute towards a final score. Now, I know there are institutions that will not welcome something like that. So obviously you want to follow the rules in your institution, but try to think creatively. There are ways to make sure that the things you put into a final score are good ultimately for the learners.
Yeah, I think it's really creative, or I don't know, it allows students to be in charge of their learning process.
And that's a very important point. I think we actually know from evidence and from research that if learners actually have a goal at the very beginning, that they are actually more likely to learn better. So it wouldn't hurt at the beginning of a class just to maybe list a couple of possible goals that learners can learn that day and ask each learner to choose which ones they want to be the goals they want to achieve that day. And also at the end of that particular lesson, you can give them short self-assessments. And the self-assessment could just be a traffic light of, red, yellow, green of, how confident am I that I've learned the content of today's lesson, red, yellow, green. And that's a very easy way for a teacher, again, without having a number, to be able to tell, do I need to cover some of this material again, or can I move on to the next thing?
Okay. And we have a few more questions, sorry.
No, I'm very happy to answer these questions.
This is from Flor, and she says, do you have any advice for assessment in preschool?
Well, remember, we want to think about test taker characteristics in order to decide whether they're cognitively valid and contextually valid. So what do we know about learners in preschool? Well, I think, Flor knows this better than me, but young kids don't have a huge attention span, right? They can only focus for so long. So one of the things to keep in mind then is you want to make sure that your assessment is relatively short and bite-sized, because otherwise, if you gave them a long exam, the reason they're not getting the answers correctly might not be that they don't know the question, but rather it's the answer, but rather it's because they couldn't focus anymore. So frequent, small, bite-sized assessments would probably be best in general, I would say.
Okay. Not only in preschool.
Well, in preschool, that's good, but even for people who are older, just being able to go in periodically helps to keep things interesting. I think one of the best classes I was in myself, my teacher regularly just change the things that we were covering after about 10-15 minutes. We tackled something else so that we can come back to things. The reality is that sometimes, right, we're trying to solve a problem and we could not think of how to solve it. And sometimes we walk away and we come back and we actually then suddenly, this is the way I can solve that problem. And language learning can be the same thing, because if we've been going at it in exactly the same way the whole time, we don't try to create other connections. And so doing little pieces and then being able to cycle back in an iterative fashion is more likely to help learning. A lot of learning is actually about frequency of exposure as well. So exposing them to the same thing in different ways multiple times is more likely to help with learning. And for that reason, it's not a bad idea to switch things up regularly.
Okay. So we have it's from Monica. And Monica says that most tests that we use are in an LMS, a learning management platform, and they tend to evaluate accuracy mainly. Using these tools, how can we start focusing on fluency instead?
Well, an LMS is just a platform, right? And the content that goes into it is what determines, the quality of it. So if it's true that the content in it is mostly focused on accuracy, then maybe the thing to think about is, could we put in different content that enables them to focus on other things? If we want them to focus on fluency, get them to talk to one another, for example, right? And there are ways to make sure that they talk more rather than less. Instead of just saying, talk about this topic in general, tell them, come up with 5 different things for something. Then, they're forced to think about 5 different things to talk about, and they're forced to be fluent because they can't just resort to the same vocabulary words they know. That's one. Well, give me a second one, a third one, a fourth one, and so on. So, yeah. Get them talking to one another.
And even the example that you showed with the pictures, the magazines that you used to wait for over the weekends, that's a very interesting thing that teachers can do in order to practice fluency.
Yeah, and that sort of thing, that sort of material is available everywhere, right? So you don't even need to come up with it yourself. Just go online, pull something down, and get people to engage around them, and it'll be great. Right. It wouldn't hurt as well. Back in the day when I was teaching, teaching listening was very challenging because, how do I come up with good materials? And I had to bring a boom box into class, and play things. It was very challenging, right? But nowadays, you go to YouTube and and these websites, and there's just materials everywhere, right? So there's really, it really would be sad if we don't make use of what's available to us. Materials are everywhere nowadays.
It's true. It's very true. Okay, and we have the last question. This is from Nora. And
okay.
She said, do you think it's a good idea to separate students according to their level of English?
I would say it probably depends on how big of a gap there is. So, for example, as someone who is at A1 basically can write their name and maybe give a few personal details. Someone who is at C1 is somebody who basically can engage at the university level. If you put someone at the A1 level and a C1 level in the same class, that's going to be a disaster for both of them, right? The A1 person will feel intimidated by the C1 person and shut down. The C1 person will feel like they're wasting their time, and so they're not learning either. So if the gap is that huge, then you certainly want them to probably be separated into different classes. On the other hand, if their level is closer, then there are ways, I think, of putting them in the same class and making it work for everyone. Because if everyone is at the same level and they all know the same things and don't know the same things, if you get them talking to one another, then nobody learns anything, right? Because what do I have to teach you? But if different people have different strengths and weaknesses and you bring them together, then, I can learn this from you and you can learn that from me. So I think, think about how big the difference in the levels are we certainly have research that shows that if the gap is too big, it's going to actually be bad for both of them.
Okay. So thank you very much. Before I finish, I thought it was very interesting what you told us about the Michigan test, the MET, all the research that's behind it, and everything that you guys are doing. So thank you so much for that. And also to finish, I have a lot of thank yous from the audience. A lot of people are saying thank you, thanks a lot. Thank you very much, Gad, for the interesting tips. And Richmond, you're great. Thank you for helping us. Gad, so are you.
Well, thank you to everyone. I'm sure this is already past their working hours. So for them to join us for this session, they're taking the time to do this. So thank you. I hope this is very helpful for you, and I hope to hear from you how you do in your assessment practice in the future.
Oh, I know that. Thank you so much for your time. Really, it was
All
very,
right.
very, very interesting. Okay, so thank you everyone so much for joining us. Like Gad said, it is after our work hours, but I think we learned a lot, and I thought it was very, very interesting. Both webinars were absolutely amazing. And also, I would like to remind everyone to register in our website, richmondweek.com, because we're going to have webinars this whole week. And tomorrow, we're going to be with Gonzalo Pastor, and we're going to talk about data analysis and evaluation. So I think this is a very interesting topic too, and we're going to learn a lot. And another friendly reminder is that the webinar on Friday is in Spanish, and it's very important. And we're going to talk about the 10 keys for a successful English program with Nicholas Dantas. So thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to use our hashtags, and see you tomorrow.